Jaime Gibbons, one of my oldest friends in recovery. So I'm a little, we'll see where this goes. But thank you for being here. We love you a lot. And I think it's only appropriate in celebration of International Women's Day.
Absolutely.
That you're here as a woman.
Yes.
And I'm not going to tell your story, but I'll say as an alumni of this program.
Yes.
And as an alumnus staff member.
Yes.
Who worked here for a number of years. So introduce yourself before we jump in. Tell us who you are and what you do.
I am Jaime Gibbons. I'm an addict in recovery. I'm an alumni of Cumberland Heights. I am an outreach coordinator for Integrative Life Center. So I work in the industry. I work helping people find treatment, whether it's with ILC or other places. And I'm just really happy to be here. I love Cumberland Heights. It's my God place.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
I'm happy.
So give us a little bit of the backstory for those that might know you or might not know you, but how long did you work at Cumberland Heights and what did you do when you were here as a staff member?
So that is a funny question because there's a couple answers. I came through Cumberland Heights in 2003 as a patient. And shortly after that, I got really involved in alumni.
You have 20 years this year?
21. I just had 21 years. Yeah. Thank you. So I got really involved in alumni, and it's what made my recovery take a different direction. Service was a huge thing for me, and so I was here all the time.
Yeah.
And being here all the time and working for free, I never thought about being here and working to get paid.
Right.
But I got a call from Barbara LaRue Adams, who was here many years ago, and she wanted me to help in the family program with the children's program, mainly. And so I did that for a couple years, just part-time. I worked with Brenda Simpkins, who was amazing, and we had an aftercare program for the kids. So we would do feelings check-in and these little activities while their parents were in their aftercare groups.
I didn't know that. I mean, I knew we had the children's program, but I didn't know that y'all were diving in those directions.
It was a very amazing thing for these kids to be able to come in and see that other kids, mommy and daddies, have to go to meetings too, and to be able to
be in the meetings,
right?
Which sometimes is
in
my humble opinion, not always.
It can be very distracting,
and distracting.
Right. And as a parent, you want to be able to focus on your recovery and know that your child is safe. So if they're on the same campus as you and
not every parent can afford to for a babysitter and all of that.
It was great. And the kids got to know that it's okay. There's nothing wrong with you. Your family isn't bad or wrong. And a lot of those kids had gone through some stuff, I mean, there was kids in there whose, maybe their parents had gone through Cumberland several times. And so this was something that was, really a part of their life. And we had a lot of kids that I watched grow up. I mean, there's several that are like adults out in the world now that I get to hear about and see about, which is just really cool.
Yeah.
Where they've gone and what they've done with their life. So I did that for a couple years. And then when I became, I was on the board for the Alumni Association, and I became the president of the Alumni Association. And so there was something in the bylaws, like you can't get paid and do that. So I stopped getting paid for a little while, but I still did the work, volunteer. And right before I was about to come out of my term as president, Brenda Simpkins asked me if I could fill in for her for 2 or 3 weeks while she was on vacation in the family program. And that was mostly just setting up the appointments, sending out packets, calling the families, explaining what, all that great stuff. And while I was here doing that, Hugh Nash.
Shout out to Hugh.
Hugh Nash, my man, said, well, what are you going to do after that?
Right.
And I was like, well, I'm just not really sure. Because I had finished my degree. I'd been kind of working in a couple different places. And so he said, well, why don't you come and work in admissions for me? I need somebody to fill in.
I didn't know you worked in admissions.
I was the administrative assistant for Hugh.
Did you ever answer for Hugh? Were you answering phones?
Oh, yeah, I was answering phones and doing.
Were you sitting at the window?
Yes, doing pre-screens.
Love it.
And, greeting people when they came in. It was supposed to be just a temporary gig while the administrative assistant was on maternity leave. But she came back and became an admissions assessor, so I kept my position. And then a couple years after that, I went to financials. Kathy Knox was like, hey, you want to come over here and work with us? And I said, yeah, this seems great.
Yeah.
And so I, spent several years with Kathy Knox and Brittany Hines and Sherry Wilson, which was just like, we were the designing women. Like, we were just steel magnolias when you have Kathy at the head, and that was actually a really, really, really cool experience for me, because I got to see everybody the day they came in, and then I got to see them the day they left, almost every single patient, that was under my programming. And it really was an inspiring time, to be able to be involved in people's lives like that, and to be able to help people figure out how they can get the most treatment for what the resources they have available. I always felt like that was my job, to figure out how I could get them the most help possible with what they had. And that was great. And then they created the alumni coordinator position, and my good friend Meryl Derrick worked in marketing and development, and she said, we're developing this position. I really want you to apply for it. And I did, and I got that job, and that was my last job.
What was that? What year was that? When did you step into alumni programming?
I stepped into that in probably...
That was before I came through here.
Yes, it was probably 2015.
Okay. Yeah, so that was after.
Probably.
So were you working in finances when I came through as a patient? When 2010?
No, I was not... I started in admissions right...
Because I have no memory of you. I just have memories of us going to crossover and transitions every week.
No. I was Yes, I was in financials during then. Mm-hmm.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Admissions and finance on the front end of any treatment center is just where so much happens. And when you mentioned that, I just, I wanted to ask you, what did you learn? What did you take away from that? Because it's an emergent situation for a lot of people that are calling.
Yeah. One of the hardest things to juggle, and I still think this, is that I was at that window, right? So I'm on the phone doing a pre-screen, and somebody's crying to me about, and then I've got somebody standing at the window, and they're getting ready to trek in to treatment. And I'm like, who's more important right now? And how do I, so... For one thing, it taught me to ask for help, for sure, because I didn't want anybody to have to wait. Yeah. I wanted people to get what they needed, and I wanted people to feel heard and respected. That was a big deal, which is hard, because people coming into treatment are not excited about being welcomed with open arms and, positive attitudes. And there's a lot of people that hated me and because I was happy, and that's okay. I get it. Meet them where they are,
For sure. But there's a lot of fear, I was
absolutely.
so scared. Like, what does all this mean? And sometimes that can come out as like grumpy cat,
right? And people would come in under the influence. They're just you can't hold anybody.
And for perspective, for anybody that might be listening, the window that you were sitting at was literally at the front door of the admissions building. Yes. Like, it's not a square foot in between those two areas.
It's the first thing you see when you come to check in for treatment. And but I always felt like that was a huge honor. To be the first person somebody sees.
This is pre-Welcome Center too.
Right,
so
absolutely. Yeah.
The actual first person.
And there was a guy who is still in recovery, and he's great and awesome, and he's very successful, and I'm so happy for him. And I remember the day that he came in, and he came in with his mom and his grandmother. And a couple of years down the road, his grandmother was here for something, and she found me and told me how much it meant to her that I was there, and I was so nice, and I was so kind, and I was so patient with them and patient with him. And, that's a big deal. That can set the tone for somebody's entire treatment experience, and as a family member, putting your loved one into treatment is a very scary situation. And so if you have somebody who is dismissive, you don't want to leave your loved one there.
Not at all.
So it was really, and I treated financials that way too. I always wanted people to feel very heard, very cared for. I mean, I would have some of the patients, parents calling me even years after I didn't work in financials anymore, if they needed advice on something or, hey, he's struggling, what should we do?
Yeah.
Which is pretty cool.
Why do you think it's important for any treatment center to have financial call discussion? Because here at Cumberland, it's in depth.
Yes,
it's not just like verification of benefits.
No.
So can you talk about that process and what that's like?
And I have, I will say this, I have struggled working at other facilities because I do think that the admissions process here is like top notch, very ethical, very straightforward, doing everything the right way. I talk with Hugh a lot about that since he was the director of admissions when I started working.
Yep.
And it's very important because people think they have insurance. They call their insurance company and they say, my child is addicted to X, Y, and Z and they need treatment. And then the insurance company gives them a list of in-network providers, which they immediately think means everything will be covered.
Right.
And they call into admissions. They go through that pre-screen, they give the information, and, they think, well, okay, they're going to verify it. It's all going to be covered.
Right.
Then they kick it to financials, and we look at the benefits.
Yep.
So we could very easily have called and said, hey, this is your deductible. This is your out-of-pocket max. This is your, co-insurance. We'll schedule you for next week.
Sounds good.
Right.
Makes sense. I'll sign the form.
Sure.
Yep.
But the problem with that is that people don't understand medical necessity and concurrent reviews and what utilization review is. And so we would tell every single person, this is the process and this is how it works. When you come in for admission, we're going to do an assessment. We're going to call the insurance company. They're going to give us an amount of days. And we're going to have to keep doing that. There's no guarantee. Some insurance policies maybe did, have a 30-day guarantee or, and some of that's changed some over the years. But it was incredibly important for us that people were not shocked or surprised when they came into treatment and heard a number or they were denied by their insurance. I also always gave the families and the patients kind of information about how they could appeal as well, because I felt like they needed to know that, if you really, the squeaky wheel gets the grease. So if you keep trying to appeal this, there's a good chance you could get some of your money back, because I'm a big believer that insurance should cover what a doctor and a clinical professional is suggesting. So, but we did that every single person that came in, and we wouldn't put them in a position where if insurance denied, they were going to have to leave with no backup plan or sign some crazy payment plan that was going to put them, underwater. It was really important to us that it was ethical, that it was straightforward. And we also got to give a lot of scholarship money away, because as we would talk to these people, when we would figure certain things out or talk about their, situations, we could look at the Cumberland Heights Scholarship Fund or reach out to other places. The Heart Fund was big at that time, and also Music Cares. So there was just a lot of things that were really positive about that job. It was a hard job. I mean, it is hard to tell somebody that their insurance company has denied and this is what they're looking at, and and it's a hard job just to, ask people for money to get well. That can be, especially for somebody in recovery, which Jay didn't want to hire me because I was in recovery and he thought I'd be too much of a bleeding heart, but I did fine.
Shout out to Jay.
So yeah, I mean, it's always important to me that my families and clients that are seeking treatment understand that process, the financial process. Really important.
Thank you for explaining that, because I think it's really valuable for people to understand for the reasons that you highlighted, and organizationally, and it's not just Cumberland. There's other great organizations that have made this decision to have the front end conversations entirely about what to expect, instead of, because the alternative is as follows: no conversation or very limited conversation. You're in an emergent situation, your loved one is in danger of losing their life or having serious health consequences as a result of addiction. So you're coming into a treatment center, just imagine, or a hospital, and you're going to sign a consent to treat like you do in an emergency room. You're signing all these forms, whatever. This is an in-network facility. I'm just going to trust the process, and I'm scared because my child needs help.
I'm desperate.
I'm
desperate.
Then the whole process goes through. The person has an experience, hopefully a great experience, and on the back end, they get information that otherwise they might be surprised to receive. And so that's the benefit of doing it the other way, of having those conversations on the front end that, hey, this is actually the deductible that you need to meet. Right. Maybe it's January 1st.
Right.
And the fiscal year just turned over, right? And so you're going to have to meet that deductible before you're going to get approval, et cetera, et cetera. So it is paramount that we have those conversations.
Absolutely.
And also I just want to say, like, thanks to you and Kathy Knox, whom we love. She was my financial advisor.
Yep.
And all Hugh Nash and Jay way back in the day, and all those that were a part of admissions, because and Liz Mayo today, and Wilson Robert, like, it's hard to have those conversations.
Absolutely.
And to be frank, it's there are folks, when you start talking about money to somebody in recovery, in early recovery or active addiction, you're at risk for losing that person.
Absolutely.
Immediately. They're just like,
they're like, oh, you just want money.
$5,000.
Yeah.
Like,
you just want money. It's
not that big of a problem.
You have to have the right person. You have to have the right person who knows how to talk to people from a place of, I just want you to be informed.
Yeah.
This is what it is. I have worked for places that did it differently, and I saw a lot of people spend kind of like the last of their money on a plane ticket, and then they get to treatment and insurance denies, 5 or 6 days in. So there,
doesn't make sense.
Right. It's not good for anybody. And so I love that more people are getting on board with, let's have these very upfront conversations and not a lot of surprises.
Yeah. Do you mind sharing a little bit about your early recovery in spirit of Cumberland Heights, and maybe start with, what's treatment like?
Oh gosh. Well, treatment for me was, I went and had an assessment at Cumberland Heights had an outpatient on Thompson Lane, and it was right across from central office. And I had gotten in a little trouble, and my family was done, for the 9th time. And so I went and had an assessment, because I was thinking in my head, I can go to IOP and bartend at night. I can go to IOP in the morning, I'm going to bartend at night. Right? Great plan. So
you were familiar with outpatient, versus residential at that time?
At that time, only because I had been, my family had put me in Parthenon Pavilion. So, because they didn't know what to do. And, they were like, hey, she seems crazy. Let's put her in here. And I was there for a few days, and they said, actually, you don't need to be here. You need to go to rehab, is what they called it. And so they kind of explained to me, you can go in person and stay there, or you can go to a place that you come and go every day, is kind of the way they explained it. And so I went and had the assessment, and, did what most of us do during the assessment, and was kind of truthful and mostly not. And they said, sure, you can probably do, IOP here. That's fine. And, I went home that day, and a friend of my dad, that worked with him, had gone to Cumberland Heights. She was an alumni, and he had mentioned that I was struggling, and she gave him Jeannie Laurent's phone number and said, I really think she should go into residential treatment and stay there. And so my dad said, will you just call this lady and talk to her? And I said, okay, because at that point I was like, I'll do whatever they want to keep them off my back. I got to protect my disease,
Right.
And I called Jeannie, and she was so amazing. And she said, why don't you just come out here and meet with me and take a tour? And I did. And I had never felt so safe in my whole entire life. I had never felt so welcome. I had never sat across from somebody who I really felt like understood what I was saying and wasn't judging me for it. And so I agreed, I'll do treatment. And at that time, the women were in one cabin, the men were in the other. We were right next to each other. The only thing that wasn't co-ed was primary group, except for the relapse group, that was co-ed. So we would, gather in the activity room, which is now the founder's room, and play Scrabble and Monopoly and, do our treatment during the day. And one of the things that was really interesting to me when I came here was the people, because I didn't know that normal people could be addicts, So I was expecting to come in and be with people who, were like the bottom of the barrel, because that's what I thought I was. Right. I had no self-worth, and I just really felt like I was so undeserving of anything. And so then when I got here and I saw these people, like one of these ladies has like a husband and kids and lives in a nice house. And then this other, it was really shocking to me that other people with seemingly normal lives could also be struggling with this. And I was not really convinced still when I came in that I was an alcoholic or an addict. It took a while. It actually was, we were in the main group room, which is now the men's main group room, I guess, the MMR. And we were doing a big like circle with like the whole traditional adult program, which you got to remember was small because it was just the 2 cabins. So it was all the men and women in there. And one of the other patients, Ryan, was telling his story, and I was like, that's exactly me. That's exactly me. And it was like that moment that I was like, oh, I do belong here, And I think that changed a lot of things for me. Going through family program was really eye-opening. And my primary therapist was Nancy Smith, and she absolutely was all about responsibility. You can take responsibility for your actions and you can get well, or you can be a victim and you can die. What do you want to do today? And I was like, who's she talking to?
Yeah,
what?
Right.
And it was life-changing. And, they suggested, do you want to go to they called them halfway houses at the time, because that's what they called them. And I had an apartment that I couldn't get out of the lease. And, I was like, I don't have money, So I went home, and I remember that first day leaving, and I was thinking like, I don't have to go to a meeting today because like I already had one this morning, like before I left. And this was like halfway down River Road. I'm already talking myself out of, my mom's in the passenger seat. I'm driving like, can't wait to get home, and thinking about these ways that I can get out of going to meetings. Yeah. And then I was like, ooh, that's scary. And I had the really such a great setup because most of the women in my primary group all went to the same halfway house, a place called Yana that was fundamental in so many people's recovery. Yeah. And wonderful, wonderful woman, Susan Benz, even though I didn't live at that halfway house, let me hang out with them. She let me go to the same meetings they went to. Yeah. She let me come to their house meetings. And so that day when I got home, I called some of them and they were like, hey, we're going to this meeting, meet us there. And I, to this day, think if I had not done that, my story would be different.
Do you remember what meeting you went to by chance?
I knew you were going to say that. It was over, it was like in West Nashville somewhere, but it was maybe like kind of near Mother Group, like in that area, but it wasn't, it's not a meeting anymore. Yeah. But it was sort of in that area. And, I don't remember what was said or, anything else. I just remember that I went to that meeting. And then I realized, I didn't have a job because I was a bartender. And so that didn't seem smart to go back and do. And so I just went to meetings all the time. I went to like 3 or 4 meetings a day, because I didn't know what to do with my hands. I didn't know, I felt weird in my skin, all these things. And
why'd you go to meetings 3 or 4 times a day?
Because I felt safe because those were my people. and I don't have to be alone and scared anymore.
Yeah.
Because, Nancy and all these other people told me that there's a solution. I mean, what a relief it is to find out that there is a solution to that just thing that has been holding you back your entire life. I swear from the time can even remember, that voice was in my head telling me I wasn't good enough, unlovable, you're ugly, you're fat, you're stupid, you're not funny, you don't have any friends, nobody likes you.
Yeah.
And the only thing that changes that is what? Alcohol and drugs. And it's not that it makes the voice go away, you just can't hear it for a little while. And then when it comes back, it's louder. So that
we're starting early. I knew this was going to happen.
But it was I think back on that now, and God, what an awesome time your first year in recovery is. And at the same time, a horrible time. Because you have to learn how to be a grown-up in front of all these people, and you make a million dumb choices. And, but at the same time, all the meeting up for coffee, coming out to crossover, and, my aftercare group. I came to an aftercare group out here for a long time, and that's how I got my first sponsor, was because I kept getting temporary sponsors and then getting rid of them because, things like I didn't like their shoes they had on, or, they told me to do something I didn't like. And so I would come in every week in aftercare and share about, I had to get rid of another sponsor because, and so these women are like, they know what's up. And they let me come in for a couple weeks and do that. And then they said, okay, well, again, you can take responsibility for yourself and do the work, or you can piddle around here and you're probably going to end up back out there. And I was like,
how dare them?
Right. Who are they talking to? Do they know who they're talking to?
Right.
And so the next day I went to a meeting at 202 and just asked some lady that raised her hand, and she was my sponsor for 4 years. So, it's the gift of desperation, I guess.
Can I tell a story about you?
Yeah.
So for those that don't know, for me, you're one of my oldest friends in recovery. I was a patient here in 2010, and I remember there was an addict in treatment at the same time. His name was Robbie. I'll just leave it at that. And there was another person here named Terry at the time who was a character. And I remember being in detox, and, I had gotten here, and it was in the evening, and I was in the room. I'm just scared out of my mind, what is going to happen here? I had no exposure to the culture of recovery at all. And I'll never forget, I was assigned a buddy, somebody to show me around where things were. And Terry and Robbie came by, and Terry was like, this is your buddy, Robbie. And Robbie, very friendly, he's like, hey, well, I'm going to come back in 30 minutes. There's going to be a meeting, and they want you to be there. And my first thought was they know how important I am, that there's going to be some sort of business meeting with the C-suite of the organization to greet me in this facility. I didn't know what a meeting was. I just, when somebody says a meeting, I'm like, oh, we're going to have an actual meeting where business occurs. Right. Which as a 20-year-old, I'm not sure what business
you thought you were in.
I was going to be a part of. Zero, It's a college dropout. So anyways, we go to this meeting upstairs in this building at the FLC. And it was an H&I meeting. And I remember being in this meeting and sitting in the back and having a blanket because I was freezing. It's April. And I thought I had it all figured out, And what I can say is at the end of the meeting, you were there. And another addict named John B. was there. And everybody shared, and I felt as people started to share, I was very dismissive, as we are please. And then it kept going, and I kept hearing me and these people's stories, and I had never experienced these similar. I never was what is this? This is so not what I expected. And by the end of the meeting, I knew two things: that everybody there was exactly like me, and that the folks that had come in to this H&I meeting had somehow seemingly managed to change. And it was this shocking piece of hope that I was not attuned to. And so after the meeting, I'm standing outside with this like extremely thin, medical blanket. You guys know what I'm talking about. The blue one, the baby blue ones, that are, we don't have this anymore to be clear, but just like they are what they are. And I like am trying to like bum a cigarette off somebody. And I never forget this guy who was standing with you at the time, John, who's just physically bigger than life figure, comes up to me and, I'm like emaciated, literally, like 130 pounds. And before I could even say anything, his body language is posturing like he's going to hug me. And I'm like, oh no, I don't know if we should do that, But he just gave me the biggest bear hug. And I remember him like holding me, like pushing me back out and said, hey man, we're glad that you're here and we're going to love you until you can love yourself. And it changed my fucking life.
Yeah.
And me and another addict named Nico, got clean around the same time. And I have so many memories of your house being this Jamie Johnson, now Jamie Abner at the time, and Dustin Tittle. Just blew some anonymity, but that's okay. My bad. But we rode out to crossover and transitions with you two for a year. And y'all changed our lives. You changed my life, Jamie. And you did love me till I could love myself just a little bit. And I'm so grateful for you, women like you, who stick around long enough in communities like this to help people regain what's been lost, because that's what it's about.
Absolutely.
So thank you.
Oh, gosh. You're welcome. But the thing about that is, and this, you didn't know it at the time, but you know it now, is that whatever you think we did for you, you did way more for us.
Yeah.
There was nothing better than having that house and having it be a safe place for people to come who were early in recovery and, when they didn't know what to do with themselves, and being able to laugh and not feel alone and not feel like you had to be or do anything to be a part of. That was a really amazing opportunity. And I was very, very blessed to have that, and very blessed that John and I were able to do that. For the time that we were.
Mm-hmm. It was special.
It was.
And that is a lot of, as quiet as it's kept, that's a lot of what happens in recovery. It's the bond of community. Now it's not that change doesn't happen, because like you said, you get confronted with opportunities to grow. Mm-hmm. And usually it's those that are around you saying, Nick, we love you, but we keep seeing you make some mistakes that we think you should really take a look at. And that's what happens.
Oh, it happened to me yesterday with some people. We were at lunch and they were like, hey, we're gonna do some accountability next month when we have lunch. We're gonna ask you about this and see if you have done anything to take care of yourself. And that's what I need. I need people to keep me accountable. I will take care of everybody else in the room and let myself wither to the wind unless people are keeping an eye on me,
Can you talk about, given all the, decade and a half, I think, but I want you to talk about crossover and transitions and kind of like, because there are groups like that everywhere, all over the country, usually associated with the treatment organizations, right? But I just, if you could color between the lines of what that type of opportunity is for alumni.
I remember a couple of things about crossover as a patient. So
this will be interesting.
There was a lot of hubbub in the cabin when it was going to be crossover night, because you got to get ready and get dressed, and because there's visitors, there's going to be people, there's going to be guys. Oh my god,
there's going to be girls. Who's going to be there?
Right, like you've been walking around in your pajamas for 4 days, and now all of a sudden you got to like get the curling iron out or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And so that was a big thing. There was a lot of that, which kind of made crossover like the most exciting thing that was happening in treatment.
Night.
Yeah. Oh, movie night was beyond exciting. because you got candy too.
That's right.
Candy and
That's
movie.
Right. That's right.
But the other thing I remember about crossover is every meeting that I went to while I was a patient, I would just look at these people and think, like, for real? Like, are they for real? And, you know, that was something to me that was very eye-opening, that there are like people who are out in the world who used to be like me, and now they are like thriving and they're like cool, awesome people, and they don't drink and they don't use drugs, and they like help other people.
Yeah.
Like what? You know, and that was really, I think, where my obsession, and I'm going to say it's an obsession with service work, came from. Because I feel so strongly about, I'm such a selfish, self-centered being in active addiction, and when my thinking is not correct. And so for me, being of service to others is what always gets me outside of myself. You know, I can love myself in an appropriate and healthy way when I am serving others and being a part of, instead of the center of, which is what I, you know, think. And that was a really, really cool time. And then, you know, that was my first experience with like a recovery crew, because once you get out of treatment, then you start coming to crossover, like whoever was in treatment with you that keeps coming back. And we would go to Fido's after, my little original group.
Yeah.
We would leave crossover, we'd go to Fido's and drink coffee until the girls had to go back to their halfway house.
Yeah.
And there was a couple guys that lived at, you know, some halfway houses. And and that was that was my first friend group.
Yep.
You know, I mean, it was really the first people that I ever met who had never seen me under the influence.
Right.
Who understood, and had been through this really major therapeutic journey with me while I was in treatment. So it was kind of the like cornerstone, you know, and as the years went on, crossover was different things to me. I remember that I had stopped going to crossover for a while. I lost my license like my second year in recovery, you know? And so and had to get a meeting sheet signed my second year in recovery. So I'm like chairing meetings and getting somebody else to sign my sheet. Yeah. But it was just the way it worked out.
Yeah.
But so I stopped going for a little bit just because of whatever.
Logistics.
And I would go to like a closer meeting and I had this thing happen in my life. When I was 3 years in recovery, I got married. And about 5 months after we got married, he disappeared. And he was a chronic relapsing addict. He did not hide that from me. I willingly walked into that situation, probably because I wanted to be right instead of happy. You know, I was going to be right. I was going to fix this situation. But he disappeared. And that was a really, I mean, talk about a hit to every aspect of your life. I mean, we were supposed to move. I had like quit my job. You know, it was just, I had to start all over basically. And so crossover became my lifeline. I was like, I can go back to crossover. I know I can, and I will be filled up with hope, and I can be of service and all these different things. And, you know, that was life-saving, life-changing. I mean, that's when I met John. And, you know, really got really, really close with a lot of people that, you know, I'm still close to. Liz Mayo, you know, I mean, just a lot of people who have, a lot of old timers that have gone on, Horace, you know, I mean, just so many people. And it was so cool to me that it could be that, you know, it could be different things. Sometimes crossover was like, just at least I could just be there and sit and get outside of myself for a little bit.
Right.
And then I would feel better. You know, I mean, it was so many different things over the years. And I think that for anybody who's been involved in it for a decade or more, will say the same thing. That whatever, it was like Mary Poppins' bag. Whatever you needed at the time is what came out of it. And it was home. It was always home. and it was always safe. And, transitions was started just really because we wanted to be out here more. There was a group of us that was like, we love it.
Let's come back tomorrow.
Right. We love this, we love this treatment center. And we wanted to expose people to more pathways to recovery.
Right.
We wanted people to hear from lots of different 12-step communities. And so we wanted to widen that. And that was also just like a magical little group of people that gathered together. And I mean, talk about commitment, because you got to be out here every time and start the, and get you got to get the people to come out and until it takes off. And, but again, you get all of these amazing experiences because you get to meet all these people and spend time with these people. And I don't know how many times over the last 20 years I've had the honor of sitting in a room and hearing somebody say, I'm an addict or an alcoholic for the first time. Because a lot of times crossover is that first time, or transitions, whatever it was. That's the first time they've ever said it. They've never introduced themselves like that.
Why do you think that is?
Why have they never?
Why was it crossover or transitions?
Because a lot of times it was their first meeting. It's the first meeting they're going to share in because you can't hide in it.
Right.
And I think people felt more comfortable sharing in that meeting than they would say an outside meeting because it's their meeting. Mm-hmm. We would say it every time, this meeting is for you, I think the recovery countdown was always just so cool to look around and see those people standing up, Robert Deweese, Sweetness, like all those people, and you'd see, people with 30 years, Joe Shea, like there's so many that just were legends in my story. Yeah. The way my brain has written it, they were legends.
Service warriors. If you think about your own life, you're listening to this and you don't struggle with addiction, you're a parent, every Friday. Yeah. Every Friday from 6 to 8, and then maybe Cracker Barrel afterwards.
Yep. Always Cracker Barrel afterwards.
Shout out to the Cracker Barrel off of Charlotte,
And I will tell you, because you may not have, I don't think you were here yet, when it was still smoking in Cracker Barrel.
I was not.
Okay. I think that it happened. I can't remember. I can't remember what year it was.
So. No. Was it the smoking side?
Yes.
I do remember that.
It was, because I think in 2010 is when they changed it, but it was like in October.
Oh, and it was like off to the...
Yes, so you would have...
Behind the lattice.
Yeah. The lattice is what is, just like in the group, in the meetings where one half of the room is smoking and you open a window.
Right.
But yeah, we would...
Wow.
Like 30 people... just piled in. And, another thing too about crossover that was cool to me was never have I seen a more motley crew of people who would not mix in any other setting than I did at those meetings specifically. Because generally when you go to outside meetings, logistically, you might see people that kind of live in the same area or whatever, or works with their schedule or, but this was a meeting of 18-year-olds and 73-year-olds, just anything you could think of, just the differences, which is, to me, what makes recovery so special is that no matter how different, if somebody is scared and lonely and they don't know what to do and they think they're going to use or worse, because there is worse when you get that way, knowing that anybody else can help them is like a huge thing. That's a huge power we hold, just to...
Even beyond the danger of using.
Right, absolutely.
Like as life shows up with the challenges that come with family and health and babies and jobs and
all of it.
The diversity of our experiences is absolutely a superpower. How many spaces and places do you know where you can just go and meet and no one's in charge? Right. And you can share your experience, strength, and hope, and just like Golden Corral, take what you want, leave the rest. Yeah. It's super powerful. And like you said, the motley crew of worldly success or financial success versus, a frontline worker versus an 18-year-old or a 17-year-old or a 16 and a 7-year-old. I mean, or a suburban mom, or
it's all
everybody.
All of the above. And that used to really inspire me and just filled it up, that just warm fuzzy in your heart when you look around and think like all of these people love each other and care about each other, and there's no reason. Nobody's making them do it,
right.
And
their shared experience
and just
pain.
to see like those relationships blossom, and especially, for me, I really don't have any significant relationships in my life today that are not because of Cumberland Heights, other than like my family of origin. Everybody else in my life, we'll let them stay. But everybody else in my life is a result of the fact that I went to treatment in 2003, which, think about that. That's pretty amazing.
And amazing, yes.
And people talk about, because I tell everybody I'm in recovery. I wasn't worried about it when I was making a fool of myself using, so I don't know why I would be worried about it telling people that I'm in recovery now. But that right there has given me the ability to like really form relationships with people who probably would not have even talked to me if they didn't know I was in recovery.
Right.
Something
I want people to hear, again, for the parent or the person who's struggling, who might stumble upon this, out of the 100 people that listen to these, which we're super grateful for, is that we love crossover. We love what was transitions, but there are groups like this that happen generally at every treatment center in this country. And it's a beautiful thing. And if you need to figure out where those are, they're usually information on their website, or an aftercare leader or alumni coordinator or Facebook group or something, right? And that's what's special about these models of treatment, is the rich alumni communities. Like we think about the evidence-based practices and the rich clinical skills and the warriors like Darche and the family program. And your counselor,
Nancy
Smith. I mean, like, who is going to tell you what it was based on her experience?
Absolutely. Regina Taylor.
There are thousands of those treatment center warriors that are doing the work, and day in and day out. But those recovery communities that you have access to because you were associated with one of these programs is life transforming.
Oh, absolutely.
And if your loved one and your child or whoever can get plugged into those, like, just watch how the wind will take their life in a direction that they don't expect.
Well, and it has been a really amazing journey watching, because like you say, now all these treatment centers have these meetings, and they're all like, oh, alumni. And it was not like that. We were very...
that's interesting perspective.
Cumberland was like one of the only places that had an alumni 21 years ago. I mean, there was a few, but it was not the norm. And, me being so alumni driven, because in my mind, like you said, treatment warriors and these clinicians are amazing, and they are saving lives every day. But somebody has to take care of these people when they leave. And that's the alumni's job, And if I had not had that safety net when I left treatment, what would have happened to me?
Right.
And that has become, over especially the last 10 years, has become more important in the grand scheme of treatment, which is so exciting to me, because I, again, don't think that I would even be here if it wasn't for a strong alumni. And because to me, it's like an extra layer of, like, just knowing the language of Cumberland Heights, and knowing, when you're in a meeting and somebody's like, hey, I was praying in the chapel, or it's just like a secret language, and it's like to your own here. And so it just makes you feel closer to people, like extra bonded. And it's like Stillwater's is the same way, and Stillwater's women and Arch, everybody has their own kind of thing. And
I can tell you it's evidenced by the fact that River Road is a SEO keyword for us. You know what I mean? Because which is just the road that happens to be where our headquarters is located.
Yep.
But it's become such a part of the culture, like you were talking about, like, we're heading to River Road.
Yeah,
you know, like,
absolutely.
It's just a fascinating piece of the culture of organizations like Cumberland.
And it's changed over the years, you know, it has, as the campus has changed. Yeah. And as, you know, there's certain places that were like of huge significance 15 years ago that are, you know, now there's shifted. Different places or different things are. So it's really unique and it's cool to be a part of.
I wanted to ask you, because I think this is so important about your story and knowing you for my whole recovery, where you've gone and the experiences you've had professionally after you've left Cumberland Heights, because you have gone on to do pretty amazing things in a few organizations. So just tell us about what that's been like for you. I guess actually what I really want to ask you is, what's been challenging about leaving a place like Cumberland Heights and what's been unexpectedly awesome?
So leaving Cumberland Heights was by far the hardest thing I ever had to do. But I had found myself in a situation where I needed to be able to like grow professionally and do some other things. And there just wasn't an opportunity at the right time. And another opportunity came. And somebody once told me, like, you can't be a messiah in your own land. And so I was like, oh, I need to go out and, you know, see what else is out there. It was the only treatment center I'd ever worked for. It was the only treatment center I went to. So I only had this perspective. Yeah. So I am grateful that I made that decision, but it was by far heartbreaking to leave. It was my home, you know, my family. I will say the challenging things, definitely comparing. Cumberland Heights is, like I said, the admissions department, the way that things are done, the way that things are managed for quality, for, you know, clinical integrity, those kind of things, that is hard. Because you can go someplace else and not know, and then you get in there and you're like, oh, you know, and then how do you reconcile, you know, those things? And just really trying to get people to buy in to what you're trying to do as the new kid, you know, that was a challenge. COVID hit, you know, not long after I left. Yep. And so then that was another layer of really not getting to know my fellow staff members. There was just like a lot in there. But I will say that I think being able to start things from scratch and do it just the way that I could see would work better was really challenging, but it was really rewarding. Mm-hmm. It was very rewarding to be able to like have some ideas and some things that, yeah, sure, like, let's do that. You know, oh, that's amazing. Like, let's do that. And, you know, and feel good about it. Yeah. You know, and be able to, another thing too, is you know, when I left, I went more into like the mental health versus the substance use disorder realm. So I got a lot of experience in that, which was completely different. I had not had that here. Right. And so I picked up a lot of skills to be able to navigate that, which was really pretty cool.
And probably serve you well today at
Absolutely.
ILN.
Yeah. I mean,
because y'all's programs
it's mental health primary and substance use. And so it's the things that I've been able to like focus on and learn and just, really interesting. I'm not a clinician. I'm never going to be a clinician. That's just not my thing. I am better
on paper.
Yeah. Sure. On paper. You know, I'm better with just the relationship side of things. But I've been able to really learn some really amazing things, especially at this time in treatment and mental health studies and the things that they're doing. And I had my brain mapped recently, which was amazing and cool. And I just think that's fascinating. And just the different things that, you know, data is giving us. And, you know, I think it's a really cool time to be a part of this. But I think that, you know, that's probably the biggest challenge, is just trying not to compare things all the time. And well, then, the biggest challenge really was, I got cancer.
Yeah.
So that was a pain. That was inconvenient. And so trying to work and do all that and keep programs alive and, while you're kind of having all this other stuff going on.
Treatments and all that. It's
surgeries and treatment and all the stuff and walking through that fear and so it was it was good for me to have that though, because I was able to again get outside myself. It's very easy to fall into pity when you're sick, and so it was a good place for me to be, just to have that. I knew these people were depending on me. I knew these alumni needed to be followed up with. I knew they needed somebody to show up at the meeting. I knew, all these things. And so that was really good for me.
It kind of makes sense that you've landed at Integrative Life.
Yeah.
With your experience.
Well, I am so surprised at how perfectly, I don't know why I'm surprised that God puts everything where it's supposed to be, because it happens every time, but it perfectly lined up and so in line with what I believe and what I want to do and who I want to be around. And I get to work for Hugh again, which is so cool. And, working there, the staff is so engaged with the clients, and everybody is just really positive, and you don't find that everywhere.
We're so proud of them.
Yeah.
It's cool to see a neighbor
absolutely
thrive.
Well, a neighbor that was originally founded by a member of Cumberland Heights. So it's like an offshoot. And I think that when you have Cumberland Heights is like everybody's big sister. It's like she's been around for forever. She has people are like she has all the answers. So it's really cool to have these other communities that have survived and have thrived and changed and become what was needed. And that's, I think, the thing that I really like what I'm doing at ILC is that I get to help people figure out where they belong. What do you need? And do we have that? And if we don't, who does? And how can I get you there?
And tell us, because I know you wouldn't do this unless I asked, because this is a Cumberland Heights show, but I want you to tell us the offerings that ILC has today in the Nashville
it's amazing.
area. Yeah.
It's ILC Integrative Life Center now has residential level of care. So for a very long time, they were PHP with housing. But several years ago, when they were purchased by Ryan Chapman, he came in and really improved a lot of systems and different things. And so he helped them to get a residential license. So we have a 30-day minimum residential programming for not only substance use disorder, but mental health primary. We also have eating disorder services for women, and we have intimacy disorder services for men. So we have all of that in residential, and then we still have our PHP with housing down off Music Row. And the thing that is so cool about that continuum of care is you get your residential, out here on River Road, and you're kind of surrounded by nature, and it's very beautiful, and you have all of these things, and you're really working on trauma. I mean, that's what we do. We're a trauma treatment center that accidentally treats these other things,
Right.
I mean, because we want to get to that core.
Right.
And so you have that opportunity to do that in this loving, quiet setting. And then you have an opportunity to go to PHP off Music Row, where there's like the city and the hubbub, but you're surrounded by safety because you live in this house with this staff person who knows you, and they can be there. So when you have something happen that is upsetting or disturbing, you can go to them, and you're not just out on your own. So I love that transition for our clients. And then we have IOP as well. And we have alumni services. So that's, of course I have to talk about that. They do an alumni meeting that is phenomenal, and, they follow up with everybody, and it's just a really great program.
Well, it's been a joy. It really has, to see Ryan's fingerprints.
Yes.
And Hugh, and how that's come together, which is certainly a God thing, I believe.
Yeah.
And to see them thriving and helping people, because there's more than enough people to be helped
Absolutely.
in this day and age.
And I had a friend of mine told me one time that if you're competing against anything other than the disease, then you're in the wrong business.
Yeah.
You know, because that's one thing I will say about Nashville that I feel is that the treatment centers that are here, we are very collaborative. We will work together.
But the truth about that is there's been a lot of people who have made an intentional decision to try to build that collaboration.
Yes.
You know, you, Jamie, Hugh, April, Butch Glover when he was with us, Tyson, Stacy Bridges, who's on our team now, and she puts on the TNTC where we have, and I'm sure I didn't mention everybody. I know I didn't.
Right.
But that's important to celebrate the spirit of collaboration.
Absolutely.
And service that we all have.
It's not like that everywhere.
It is not like that everywhere.
And that is, it's very, very rewarding to know that if I have somebody that I'm working with, because once I start working with somebody, like I'm invested in that.
Yeah.
Like I want to make sure they are safe and get what they need. So if we're not the place, then I know I can trust these people that I am passing them on to. Yeah. You know I can. I mean, without a doubt.
Well, I love you.
I love you too.
Thank you for coming, especially on International Women's Day. It's just completely appropriate.
You know, I didn't add this. When I was president of the Alumni Association, I was actually the first female president ever of the Alumni Association of Cumberland Heights.
That's awesome. Well, thank you for coming out. We really appreciate it. We love you. We're going to link in the description for ILC and for you and your socials and all of that. So give us a follow, like us below. We love you. We'll see you next time.